it's too late now, but because my mum didn't grow up in a Christian home and didn't grow up with a believing family, but it was Pastor Denise, and her father was a door-to-door salesman who invited my mum to youth group, and my mum got saved. So, well, I owe a debt to Pastor Denise and her family for doing that. I must confess I am a little bit nervous today. I don't usually get nervous speaking in front of people, but it's been quite a while, and I'm scared of Pastor Rob. So I'll do my best to get all the words out this morning. And another apology, today isn't really a Christmas message. So if you came to church, if this is like the one time a year you come to church and you're hoping for a Christmas message, firstly, where have you been all year? Secondly, come along Thursday night at 6 for the Christmas Eve service. I'm sure Christmas will get a run that night. If you've got a Bible, you can turn to Mark chapter 11. The title of my sermon is The Fig and the Furious. I don't usually try and give amazing titles to my sermons, but I'm changing that now after I heard someone else explain why titles matter. So this is a new day in my preaching, The Fig and the Furious. Apparently it helps you remember the message if it's got a good title, so there we go. Mark chapter 11. Let me bring that up so that I can read along with you. It says in verse 12, the next day as they were leaving Bethany, Jesus was hungry. Seeing in the distance a fig tree in leaf, he went to find out if it had any fruit. When he reached it, he found nothing but leaves, because it was not the season for figs. Then he said to the tree, "May no one ever eat from you again." And his disciples heard him say it. Skipping down to verse 20, it says, in the morning as they went along, they saw the fig tree withered from the roots. Peter remembered and said to Jesus, "Rabbi, look, the fig tree you cursed has withered." "Have faith in God," Jesus answered. "Truly I tell you, if anyone says to this mountain, 'Go throw yourself into the sea,' and does not doubt in their heart but believes what they say will happen, it will be done for them. Therefore I tell you, whatever you ask for in prayer, believe that you have received it, and it will be yours." How many people think that Jesus does some strange things? They're strange to us because we live on the other side of the planet, 2,000 years later. We speak a different language, we have different customs, different culture, different social norms. So a lot of the things he does are strange to us, but then he does some things that are strange even to the people that grew up with him, yeah? That even they look at him and go, "What are you on about?" He sees this tree in the distance, he thinks he's hungry, he goes over, it has no fruit, and he gets angry with the tree. Has anybody here ever been angry with a tree? If you have, you're Christ-like, because Jesus got angry with a tree. Now, I have a revelation about God a few years ago that he is passionate about gardening. He's like a horticulturalist or something. You know, he built the world and he built us, and we're like the prize creation. He thought, where can I put my prize? I know, I'll put them in a garden. They'll love it. When he's on earth and he's walking around, he needed a place to pray. When he was, going to face the cross and needed to collect his thoughts, where did he go? He went to a garden. He just loves them. He tells stories to people all the time about I'm the vine, you are the branches, about sowing and reaping and about vineyards, and it's like he's obsessed with gardening. Even when he died and rose from the dead and that stone was rolled away, Mary was the first to see him, and who did she mistake him for? The gardener, see? You're starting to get it, yeah? He's obsessed with gardens. I don't know if he walked out that resurrection morning and just kind of walked out the first thing he did when he was alive, and it's like he saw some weeds and they haven't even tended the garden here. It's like he just couldn't walk past it. And so she thought he was the gardener. I used to pray every Friday night when I was watching the Broncos. What are you laughing at? God is obviously a Broncos fan. We know this. I used to imagine as a young man that Jesus was sitting next to me watching the Broncos. And I used to pray very hard, "Come on, Jesus. Why did he drop that ball, Jesus?" Obviously I didn't pray hard enough this year, but I used to pray. But then I had a realization after I found out this thing here about Jesus and his love for gardens. Jesus was never next to me while I was watching the Broncos games. He was in the other room with my wife watching Better Homes and Gardens on Friday night. So Jesus gets angry with a tree. And his disciples think disciples heard him say it. I want you to remember that. We're going to come back to that. Let's go back. Will surely die. So he makes a garden. He puts a tree in it. He says, do not eat from this tree. Which is the opposite of kind of the message he has in Matthew chapter 26. It says, while they were eating, Jesus took bread, and when he had given thanks, he broke it, and he gave it to his disciples, saying, take and eat, this is my body. Then he took a cup, and when he had given thanks, he gave it to them, saying, drink from it, all of you. This is my blood of the covenant, which is poured out for many for the forgiveness of sins. So I want you to get this morning. See, he makes a tree, says, don't eat from it. If you eat from it, you will die. He sits in a room with his disciples, he gets some bread. He says, here, eat this. In fact, if you know the story, it says, as often as you meet together, eat this and drink this. Don't eat this, eat this. Two kind of sentences a few thousand years apart. Don't eat this, here, eat this. You see, you know that Adam and Eve did eat from the tree. The Bible says they ate from the tree. They looked down and they knew that they were naked. They became self-aware. It's almost like they remembered themselves. Jesus has some bread. What did he say? He says, do this in remembrance of me. Don't eat this because you will die. Eat this and you will live. Is this making sense to anyone? Don't eat this because you'll know the difference between good and evil. A sin consciousness will come upon you. You'll look down and you'll become obsessed with your performance, with right and wrong. Here, eat this as often as you meet together. Eat this and drink this in remembrance of me. In fact, that verse says, drink this, every one of you, in remembrance of me. When Jesus gave the bread and he gave the wine, it says, this is the new covenant. That word is a new agreement. You know what the agreement is you have with God at the moment, if you believe? Can I remind you of the agreement you have with God? It's a very good agreement. His body broken, yours made whole. His blood shed, you made righteous. That's a pretty good agreement. In fact, if I could organize any agreement that I could have with God, that'd be the one agreement I want. He called it the new covenant because there was an old covenant. And the tree of the knowledge of good and evil actually represents the old covenant. It actually represents the old law. It represents the Mosaic law. You see, the Bible says when they ate of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, they knew themselves. They became aware they were naked. It says they became ashamed and afraid, and they hid, separated from God. They knew the difference between good and evil. Well, that's what Paul says the law was about. Paul says the law was given so that you would know right from wrong, yeah? He actually says, how would I know what sin is unless the law had told me? The law wasn't given so that you would follow it and become righteous. The 10 Commandments weren't given so that you would keep them and become a good Christian. They're not given so that you would keep them and find your way to heaven. They were given so that you would know in black and white what is good and what is evil. Paul explains that in the book of Galatians. They were given so that you would know that you can never keep them. They were given so that you would know that you're a sinner and that you need saving. Well, that's exactly what happened when they ate from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. They knew. They were ashamed. And they were separated from God. You see, the Mosaic law just put in black and white what mankind already knew in their hearts when they took part of the tree of knowledge of good and evil. Does this make sense to you this morning? The old covenant is all about looking at yourself, your performance, how good you've been, self-righteousness. It leads to pride or shame. It leads to boasting or guilt. But in every situation, it suppresses faith. It kills faith. You know, when I read about the fig tree, Jesus curses this fig tree, and they realize it's cursed. They point it out to Jesus, and Jesus goes immediately into a small little lecture on faith. A strange thing to say. I would have thought if Jesus was going to talk about moving mountains and great faith, it would have been after he'd raised Lazarus from the dead, yeah? Or after he'd walked on water. Or after he'd multiplied bread and fed thousands upon thousands. But no, he launches into a talk on faith after he curses a fig tree. And the fig tree dies. It's strange. He's making a point about the old law. He's making a point about performance-based Christianity. About focusing on how good you've been instead of eating and drinking and remembering him, yeah? Comments about it all the time. But he had a hard time finding it. You know, when there's a big storm in the boat and Jesus is kind of asleep in the boat and all the disciples are panicking. They think they're going to die and they wake Jesus up. What is the phrase Jesus used? It says, "Where is your faith?" It's like, where is your faith? Or that time when there's a big crowd and they've been following Jesus all day and they're hungry and the disciples are thinking it's going to take someone, 12 months' wages to feed all these people. Where are we going to get all this bread? What does Jesus say to them? He says, "Where is your faith?" Give them something to eat. Where is your faith? Or there's that time where Peter walks on the water. Can you imagine walking on the water? And Peter's walking on the water and doing something none of us have ever done before, like absolutely amazing. Then he looks around, he notices the storm, he notices the wind and the waves, and he starts sinking. The Bible says Jesus grabs him. What is the words Jesus has for Peter as he's sinking? Not like, "I've got you, buddy." Not like, "Hold on to me," or something like that. He says, "Peter, why did you doubt? Why did you doubt?" Well, there's even that time when Jesus has been up, with, the whole transfiguration thing happens. And he comes back, and the disciples that he left behind have been trying to heal this demon-possessed girl. And they bring this girl, and they say, "Look, we took her to your disciples, and they couldn't heal her." And what does Jesus say? "Ah, you perverse generation. Such little faith." It's like he was searching for it everywhere, but he couldn't find it. And you wonder, how could all these people see the miracles that he's done? Be front row to bread being multiplied and storms being shut down and just throwing your net over and there's like 1 billion fish in there. And just, how can they be front row for this? And Jesus is still like, "Where is your faith?" Until you realize Jesus actually came to a people who were obsessed with their own performance. Obsessed with keeping the law. Obsessed with debates about what's right and what's wrong. In fact, they had taken the laws in Leviticus and Deuteronomy and They'd taken them to the extremes. They had organized their whole society about who was keeping them the best and who was keeping them the worst. They had broken off into sects, and the Sadducees and the Pharisees and all these people, and we believe this, and you're not as good as us because you do it that way and we do it this way, and you're unclean, so you go over there, and we're righteous, so we'll do it this. You know, they were obsessed with it. Their whole society, their families, everything was organized. Eating every day from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. Think about the questions they had for Jesus. Like, if you could ask Jesus any question, what would you ask him? Well, these are the questions they asked him. Jesus, we've seen that your disciples aren't fasting like ours. How is that right? Obsessed with right and wrong. Jesus, we saw you heal that person on the Sabbath day. How is that right? Jesus, here's a man born blind. Tell us, who sinned? Him or his parents? Like, that's the question you have? Jesus, here's a woman caught in adultery. Our law says she must be stoned. What do you say? Tell us, Jesus, which is the greatest of the commandments? Every day obsessed with right and wrong, obsessed with their own performance, eating every day from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Is it any wonder that Jesus found no faith? Because when you concentrate on your own performance, it suppresses faith. It kills faith. Sin consciousness, self-consciousness suppresses faith. Now, there are two people when Jesus was on earth that Jesus said had great faith. Now, this little bit is not my revelation. I need to be upfront about that. I like to preach things that I discover, but this little bit I stole, all right? I borrowed. I'll give it back to them. There are two people that Jesus found who had great faith. One was the centurion soldier, yeah? Who had that servant that was sick, and Jesus couldn't make it. He said, well, just say the word, Jesus. Say the word, and it will be done. And Jesus was like, you have amazing faith. The other was the Syrophoenician woman with the daughter. She couldn't bring the daughter with her. And Jesus says, it's not right for me to take what's meant for the children and give it to the dogs, yeah? And she says, but even the dogs get the crumb under the table. And Jesus was like, when you read the scripture, you always see his jaw drop. He's like, I have not found such faith in all of Israel. What's the one thing those two people had in common? They were not Jews. They were not eating from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil all day. They were not obsessed with the law like the Jews were. They didn't know the ceremonial washings and the way to approach God and what was written in Leviticus. They didn't know. They knew Jesus. When they weren't conscious of themselves like the Israelites were in their own performance, they were conscious of Jesus, and they had great faith. And getting back to my own stuff, now, I love the difference between the two. You know, that the soldier, he seems to have faith in the power of Jesus. You just say the word, and bang, it'll be done. He has such faith in God's authority. Whereas the Syrophoenician woman, to me, she shows that she has faith in the character of Jesus, in the nature of Jesus. You know, Jesus kind of insults her. I wouldn't even give to it's meant for the kids. You think I'm going to toss it to the dogs? And she says, but even just a crumb. It's like she's saying, Jesus, you wouldn't even treat a dog that bad. You're not going to send me away with nothing. You're not going to send me away with nothing. It's like, who do you think you are? I know you, Jesus. You're not going to send me away with nothing. And it's like, oh, she gets me. She gets me. No, your daughter's well. Off you go. Eating from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil brings a focus on yourself, a focus on your performance, and it suppresses faith. Fixing your eyes on Christ, taking of the bread, drinking of the wine, we remember him. We remember him. We fix our eyes on him. Let's go back to the fig tree for a second. When Jesus saw that fig tree in Mark chapter 11, he says he went to find out if it had any fruit. But when he reached it, he found nothing but leaves, because it was not the season for figs. And he said, "May no one ever eat from you again." May no one ever eat from you again. It's not the first fig tree we find in the Bible. There's actually another fig tree. I kind of think it's more famous than this fig tree. When you think fig tree in the Bible, a lot of people think of this one. I think of the one back in Genesis. You see, when they ate from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, the Bible says they looked down, they knew that they were naked, they were ashamed, they were afraid, they went and hid. And then it says they fashioned for themselves covering out of what? Fig leaves. They fashioned themselves a covering out of fig leaves. Fig leaves are kind of emblematic in the Bible of man's own attempts to make themselves acceptable to God. Man's own attempts to perform. Our attempts to, I like the word self-righteousness. We don't get into heaven through self-righteousness. We don't make ourselves acceptable to God through self-righteousness. That's kind of what fig leaves represent. I kind of wonder if Jesus has such a memory that when he sees these fig trees, he's already got a vendetta against it, you know? Like, I know he's a gardener, but maybe there's just one kind of tree that he's always just like, it was you. It was you. And he walks past this tree and he's got no fruit, and that just tips him over the edge. All right, that's it. But he says it's not the season for figs. Let no one eat from you again. That's a prophetic statement. He's saying that for our benefit, not for the fig tree's benefit. He's saying that for you and I. He came to declare, I hate saying this phrase, a new season. All right, never saying that again. All right. It is not the season for figs anymore. It's not the season anymore to try and impress God with how good you are. It's not the season anymore to look down. But he came to bring a new agreement. To eat the bread and to drink the wine. And I get so sad because I think there are many of us who still, even though we take the bread and we drink the wine, spiritually we're still eating the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. How do you know if you're one of those people who accidentally or habitually or subconsciously you're still eating the fruit? Well, you might have had thoughts like I've had it. Sometimes they still kind of sneak in. When I start to pray or have time alone with God, sometimes the first thoughts I have are some of the things I've done wrong in the past week. Is there anybody else that's like that, or is it just me? And I kind of think, does God want to hear from me today? That's me just kind of accidentally taking a bite of the tree of knowledge of good and evil. Sometimes when I think about maybe the prophetic words I've received or the promises God's given me or the dreams that I have, sometimes on a bad day, I start to think those things are slipping out of reach. Not because God's not good, but because I'm not sure I'm good enough. I mean, God wouldn't use someone with the problems like me to do something that good. That's kind of me taking a bite of the tree of, that's me looking down and cheating myself out of promises from God. Sometimes when there's somebody sick or somebody wants prayer for something and, we need a bit of faith, sometimes even as I go to lay hands on someone to pray, sometimes it's, Am I allowed to be true today? Am I allowed to be honest? Sometimes there's a quick thought that comes into my mind. Are you sure you're good enough to pray for that? Are you sure you're good enough to believe for miracles? Does God use someone with your past and your track record and your bad habits, with your carnal thoughts? Does God use somebody like that to do miracles? That's me taking a bite. Hey, sometimes I even struggle to hear the voice of God, because there's a thought in my mind saying, why would God speak to someone like me today? I don't know if I'm being too honest. But that's just eating of the tree of knowledge, good and evil. That's not taking the bread and taking the wine. Think about this. God created the world and said it was good. And in that perfect world, you and I were created with no knowledge of good and evil. Think about that. That God's plan for your life was to have no knowledge of how good you were performing. You were to know Him and Him alone. And yet all we think about, is how we're performing. And we wonder where our faith has gone when it comes to believing for miracles and promises and hearing the voice of God. You need to throw that away. You need to throw it away. Doesn't mean you just go and sin all you like. We'll preach about that another day. But you need to come into the presence of God thanking God for who He is and looking upon His face and taking the bread and taking the wine. God, I thank You that You are good, that You are full of mercy, that You are full of grace. I thank You that You don't turn anyone away who reaches out to You. God, I thank You that You surprise the disciples every day with Your kindness and Your patience, that You forgive not just once, not just twice, but 70 times 7. That's how I come into the presence of God now. I don't even mention myself. Don't even think about myself. There'll be time for that later. But I fix my eyes on Him. Can I get the band to jump on up? I like being real practical when I preach. I like giving you things that you can take away and do, instead of just everyone going, oh, that was nice. And this week, I want you to do something different in your own personal time when you go and approach God. Maybe you get the Bible open, or you're driving in the car and you think of God. I want you to do something different. I want you to forget about yourself. If you're in the habit of coming to Christ and starting off with apologies, which some people are, I used to be like that. I used to start my time alone with God with confession of sin. I can tell you, this might change someone's life. That is the worst way to start your time alone with God. That's you trying to make yourself good enough to then have time with God. That's what it is. Confession of sin is in the Lord's Prayer, but you notice it's not at the start? It's near the end. The start is, Our Father, hallowed be Your name. Yeah? Do not start your prayer time this week thinking of the list of things you could have done better, or the ways you could have been better, or apologizing for that. Even if you've just done something really stupid that you really regret, don't mention it. Instead, say this: Jesus, thank You that Your body was broken and mine is made whole. Thank You that Your blood was shed and I am now the righteousness of God. Yeah? That I'm 100% forgiven. That I don't have to get all the things right and perform all the things exactly to the letter of the Lord to make it into Your presence. No, Hebrews says now, I boldly approach the throne room of God, not because of who I am, but because of who He is. Not because of my goodness, but because of Your goodness, yeah? awesome. You can play whatever you like, by the way. Preferably Christian. I'll leave you with a final verse this morning. I don't have it on the screen, sorry, you'll have to memorize it, look it up. It's a famous one. It's from Hebrews, again, chapter 12. It says, "Fix your eyes on Christ, who is the author and perfecter of our faith." Some versions might say the author and finisher, or the beginning and the end of our faith. See, Jesus saw that fig tree. He makes that prophetic statement that the season for figs is over. No one will ever eat from you again, yeah? And the disciples, they come back the next day, they notice that it's withered up. And then he launches straight into faith. You have faith to move mountains. Anything you ask for and you believe will be done for you if you stop eating from that tree. Yeah? You stop eating from that tree and you'll have faith. See, faith comes from fixing our eyes on Christ. He's the author. That means he's the beginning of faith. Faith starts not because you had a revelation of yourself, you had a revelation of Christ. True? He's the author of your faith. He is also the perfecter. That means that's how faith grows. That's how it matures. That's how your faith becomes perfect. If you want to do greater things for God, you want to see greater moves of God in your life and in your workplace and in your family, and you want to see bad habits broken or whatever it is, fix your eyes on Christ, because that's not only how faith starts, it's how it grows and how it becomes perfect. And it's how it matures. Not through an eye fixed on your performance, but an eye fixed on his performance on the cross. You mind if I get everyone to stand this morning? Am I allowed to do that? You stand this morning. We're going to sing a song in just a moment. And I want you to spend this chorus that we just sang briefly with your eyes fixed on Christ. And I really feel this morning as I was preparing, particularly for young people, because I struggled with this when I was young, as a young adult. Really struggle with this. If there's a habit in your life that you're struggling to break, if there's something going on in your life that you're ashamed of, you feel like you can't tell anyone about it. If they knew it, they would be, you think, no one would be happy with you. They wouldn't like you. You'd lose friends or whatever it is. But every time you go to God, that thought about that controlling issue or whatever it is just in your mind. You've tried everything. You've tried making promises to God that you'll never do it again. Who's ever made a promise to God you'll never do it again? I've only made 10,000 of those, all right? And I'm yet to keep one. You've tried making promises you'll never do it again. You've tried self-effort and will and setting 30-day challenges or whatever it is. You've tried, I'll never do that again. I'll never. It just doesn't work. I want you to do something this morning. I just want you to lift your hands. I just want you to thank Jesus. And forget about it. You will not fix a life-controlling problem through willpower. You will not fix it by reading a self-help book. You will fix it with eyes fixed on Christ. Because the Bible says you'll be transformed into his image. You become what you look at. Did you know that? Fix your eyes on Christ, you'll be transformed into his image. Fix your eyes on yourself and your problem, it's just going to keep happening. Fix your eyes on Christ, you'll be transformed into his image. See, sometimes there's something going on in your life that only he can fix. You can't fix it. Now, I'm not saying that you don't need to talk to someone about it and take the normal steps of wisdom. You do that. Do everything you think to do in the natural, but spiritually, stop eating from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. And every day, eat of the bread and eat of the wine. and fix your eyes on Christ. And He will change you. Amen?